So, what causes the interference, bleed? Primarily around with the high frequency of 5G networks around in or near or around airports often result in a bleed over into our equipment on critical flights, critical time of flight, either on takeoff or landing. The other problem which makes this even more difficult to manage is that we have a significant number of aircraft out there that are old. We heard about the supply chain issues not being replaced anytime soon either. And they are not, do not necessarily have the right equipage or filtering on board some of these primarily radio altimeters, which I'll speak about, which causes some of this interference to be more prevalent. So, what can the interference lead to? It can lead to miscommunication. It can lead to a loss of navigation signals, which I can tell you that would not be, and is not the greatest thing to happen in any phase of flight, but in particular on takeoff and in particular landing. And there's an increase of other risks during critical flight phases. There are potential for operational disruptions, misalignment, go-arounds, holding patterns, diversions, especially in terms of aircraft not being, as I mentioned earlier, not with the right equipment on board. And obviously, anytime you introduce manual processes in what has become a pretty automated environment in the cockpit, we also introduce greater risk. Of course, there are costs to that. We put some numbers to it, but primarily where did the costs originate? On high performance will and is impacted. We've seen that during the last 5G rollout in the US in particular. Fuel efficiency, if we are doing go-arounds, if we are doing holding, if we are doing diversions, for sure there's going to be additional cost to that. And obviously there's operational costs associated with maintenance and increased passenger compensation in terms of irregular operations. So, we'll say on a positive note, we are seeing indications that the current U.S. government, as well as the FCC, and in particular the FAA, are trying to find a solution to this problem. If they don't, however, the costs associated with just using an independent survey isolated to 10 airports would be around $5.5 billion. How? Arrival disruptions, which I mentioned, go-arounds, diversions, passenger time loss, etc. Reduced operations because of the inability to fly, which would be compounded in loss of revenue, and retrofitting costs, which would be in terms of new radio altimeters, new filters, upgraded packages, any labor associated with that. So it's a big price tag. Don't get this right, never mind the more important part, which is the safety element. So, radio altimeters, like I mentioned, is what we're talking about. Critical part of our aircraft systems basically tell you where you are in terms of height, using radio signals. Something that's really been difficult is that the standards for new and what would be considered more resilient equipment is taking years and not available yet. And will not be fully available and fully deployed across the entire fleet of aircraft globally until 2035. Voluntary mitigation has been working for the most part, and I'll talk about that in a second. But it's critical that we get onto this now. As an example, the mitigations, which I'll explain in a second, in Canada and Australia are up in early 2026. So they could revert to a different system, which would be very troublesome, and also the fact that the US is up in 2028. Not to mention that, as I mentioned earlier, the new equipment won't be available until between 2032 and 2035, so we've got a problem for the next 10 years or so. So what needs to happen? We need to ensure that 5G is deployed safely. So we all love our 5G. I'm on one as well, like the stream stuff. And you'll notice probably when you're on an airplane that in a lot of locations around the world, your signal just isn't that great on an aircraft, which you might think is shitty, but we will say it's good because it's safer that way. And we want to make sure that we maintain that. How do they do that? They point their antennas away from the airport, and they lower the frequency at which it's operating. So 5G simply may be available in certain locations of the airport, but certainly not near out in the tarmac or near the runways. We need some global consistency. Right now, I mentioned that every regulator in the world sort of is involved in this, and right now there are no real standards internationally on how to deal with 5G. So we're going to try to work and continue to try to work with regulatory fragmentation, primarily through ICAO. And we want to strengthen transparency primarily with communication to the telcos, telecommunication operators, as well as other aviation industry professionals, so they understand the amount of incidents that we're taking or occurring and the impact that has on aviation, which basically would involve us getting more data, which we are currently compiling. So that's it on spectrum. It's a big issue. It can be a rather technical topic, sometimes difficult to explain, but nonetheless a very important one, not only in terms of cost, but like I mentioned, safety. GNSS interference, nothing new to most of you. This is sort of an idea or a graph to show where we're getting it. It used to be very concentrated, primarily in the Middle East, and then with the Ukrainian conflict around Eastern Europe. Now it's all over the world, and this is not necessarily as accurate, given the fact that it's only until June. You would see South America lit up red with the issues that are around Venezuela. And every carrier operating in there today are complaining and highlighting issues around spent jamming and spoofing in and around Venezuela, but also into the Caribbean. And I don't think it takes a rocket science to explain why that would be the case. So we're seeing an increase. We're seeing an increase in flights, obviously, which you would have heard of from the economic outlook this morning. But we're also seeing a rate increase. So this is not just a number increasing because the number of flights are increasing. The actual rate per thousand is going up at the same time, which is a considerable concern given the fact you can see the jump it's taken from 2022 to today. And this is using our FDX data that we have under our GATM program. So perhaps I should explain jamming and spoofing for just a second for those that may not be familiar. The two issues that we're talking about. Jamming is when there's no signal going through, basically avoiding or preventing the signal from GPS to the aircraft for positional awareness. Spoofing is when it tells the aircraft it's somewhere else. Neither one of them are good, but there's a difference between the two of them. And it's all military, primarily related, at least 90% of it anyway. So, good news, ICAO has recognized finally that this is not a regional issue, it's a global issue. So at the most recent ICAO assembly, there was an agreement and a resolution that states must begin to act on recommendations actually that we provided for them at the assembly. So they want to get better reporting between pilots and the controllers, so that sort of like what we've done on turbulence aware pro platforms and others, to let pilots know where and when this is happening, particularly around conflict zones, but it's actually beyond conflict zones today. Where it's possible, certain locations around the world, certainly countries, backup navigation systems would be welcomed in terms of investment. To this day, OEMs have not provided a standard operating procedure to deal with this, so every airline basically is working off their own standard operating procedures when it comes to dealing with this. That should be standardized, and it should be the responsibility of the OEMs to tell us how we should best manage these, and we can implement them into our various operations procedures. And airlines need to obviously continue to do the risk assessments on where they're going to fly. I used the Venezuela example earlier. you could see that, as soon as the escalations began, a lot of airlines used the risk assessments and stopped operating, but not everybody. And that's the way it should be. The safety management systems are our best guidance. And obviously we need to train our pilots, hopefully eventually, on a standard procedure in terms of how to deal with it. So GNSS is a big issue. It is not going away. It's only getting worse. Good news is that IATA was on it. The bad news is that we tend to be slow when we're dealing with these things from a regulatory standpoint. Lithium batteries. Everybody thinks they know everything about lithium batteries today, but we're here to tell you that you do not. Everybody in this room, I presume, flew to come here today, and I would say that means 100% of you had a phone on board. No phone, no cell phone. 60% usually have a laptop. That's probably higher amongst this group, I would suspect. And getting close to half people are carrying power banks now, and that is growing. If you ask somebody the question, are you familiar with what you can and cannot do when it comes to carriage of lithium batteries? The resounding response is yes. Until we dig in deeper. 50% think it's okay to pack small lithium battery items into their checked luggage. Almost 50% incorrectly believe it's okay to pack power banks into their checked luggage. And 33% believe that there are no power limits in the power banks or spare batteries which are carried on board aircraft. I'm actually surprised that's not even higher. So we're promoting and doing actually it's our first B2C campaign in terms of education around this. So when we all check in at the airport for a flight, we do it online primarily, but 90% of us anyway, and we blow through that prohibitive list that explains all this stuff. So we're trying to do it in a simpler way and get the message out. Pack light, only bring the devices and batteries you really need. Stay alert. If it's hot or smoking or damaged, let someone know. Keep devices with you at all times. Checked baggage is not an option. Protect loose batteries. So what does that mean? Make sure that they're packed properly and cover up the terminals just to avoid a short. If you get gate checked, there used to be a time when you had to remind, and some people may have been reminded, and the agents are getting better at it, say, well, do you have any medication in your bag? Well, now that should be, do you have any medication in your bag, and do you have any lithium batteries in your bag? Check the battery size. It's 100 megawatt hours, or watt hours rather, that you're allowed on board an aircraft. Anything above that, you need to ask. And there's limitations on how much you can take. Anything above 250, you cannot take at all. And check airline rules. Not every airline is fully consistent in terms of their there's a standardization, but there are variations that are allowed and the airlines. So make sure you know what you're capable of and not capable of carrying. Very simple, but trying to get the message out to all the consumers as much as possible. Thanks very much. Happy to take any questions. But you're going to show the video first.
Hey there, travelers. Look, quick heads up. When you fly, any electronic device with a lithium battery is a potential hazard if not packed properly.
I said one at a time, please.
Can I go there, please? She vibrates.
Okay, listen up. Here are the rules. I get it. You're excited for your trip, but pack light. Only bring the devices and batteries you really need.
If a device is hot, smoking, or damaged, tell the crew immediately.
Look, I fly. That's kind of my whole thing. But with bigger batteries, I can't board without airline approval.
Thank you. You may board now.
I'm cleared for takeoff. Yay! Let's fly!
Always, always keep electronic devices in your hand baggage. Huh?
Not the
And if your bag gets checked in at the gate, remove all devices first.
If you've got spare batteries, cover the terminals with tape or use the original packaging.
Different airlines, different rules, so please always remember to check.
If batteries could talk, they'd tell you how to pack smart and fly safe. Always check with your airline before you fly.
So, kind of cute, get the message across. We were surprised, not surprised, and pleasantly surprised, I guess, by the fact that a lot of airlines have chosen to service on board your aircraft. We were in IATA's headquarters about a month ago. They're playing it actually on their TV screens within their headquarters office. So it's been widespread use, and we're seeing it out there to get a good message across in a simple way. And I think Willie mentioned this morning that we're looking at doing that for baggage when evacuating aircraft, because like we all know that this is a problem. Certainly don't want to be evacuating aircraft, but when we do, we want to make sure you're not taking your carry-on baggage with you. So with that, if there are any questions, by all means.
Hello again, Kurt from Air Transport World. Thanks for your presentation. I'd like to have a bit more information on the situation in general. How satisfied was this year for you in terms of safety, beside the aircraft crashes we had, incidents? So maybe you can give us a bit of an update on the status.
So, we're actually now pulling together our annual safety report. So we should have that ready for release first week of February. There's been a couple of incidents that we all will be very familiar with during the year, but in general terms, the rates are good. So, I mean, it's never good to have an accident, obviously, but in terms of consistency year over year, the numbers are pretty good.
One follow-up, if I might. As Willie and you just mentioned the evacuation situation, that so many people take still their luggage on. So from your perspective as well, what have to be done, and I think this should be addressed actually very soon and quickly to avoid this, as we, especially through social media, see this very often.
Yeah, it tends to be very specific to a certain part of the world that we see more of it, but it's actually becoming an issue globally. But we are going to do a similar B2C campaign that sort of explain the importance of it. We had discussions with the FAA at the ICAO assembly. They are concerned as well because they see it very prevalent in their area in particular. The 90-second rule, we're nowhere close to that. And so, we intend to put a lot of emphasis on this in 2026, starting with the campaign, and then we'll do some further follow-ups, educational sessions, webinars, whatever we can do. EASA's on board with anything that we do in this regard as well. Yeah.
And we're also looking at speaking to someone to try and find out the psychology behind why people feel the need to grab their bag rather than put their life first, and also kind of herd mentality. So is it if one person does it, do the rest of the people do it? And then the assets that we develop for that, for the industry, will look to address those specific psychological sort of traits and follow. Thanks.
So Catherine's the one doing the video.
No.
Yeah?
No, I can't hear you. We have a mic.
I can hear you.
Okay, I'll stop.
No, we'll bring you a mic.
Oliver Gill from the Sunday Times. Just a couple of questions. Any reflections on the recent situation with the Airbus A320 family and the software update and how that played out? It was obviously it was resolved fairly quickly, but is this something we're going to see more of? And just any thoughts on that? And secondly, you said just then the issue with the people grabbing their hand luggage is particularly acute in one part of the world. Which part of the world?
North America. In terms of software, the software update for Boeing, you know, in general, no, we wouldn't have a lot to say about it. It was handled excellent, actually. I mean, the majority, there's a lot of sensationalism around what was required. You know, I think people were looking for the entire fleet of A320s to be grounded and there'd be massive disruption, and they were kind of disappointed the next day when they find out that all the aircraft were actually updated overnight, and it was a software rollback. This happens quite frequently. And, you know, airworthiness directives are nothing new in this industry. They were less likely to be headlines, and perhaps that's just the world we live in now in terms of social media and the availability of this stuff. But I think, no, I wouldn't say anything. We were tracking the event, but I think it was handled very well by all the regulators involved, and in particular by Airbus.
Nick, at the AGM in the summer, you talked about the lithium battery issue and the fact that some airlines were introducing, you know, unilateral policies on power banks and so on. That's continued, and there have been a series of fires through the course of the year, which doesn't tally very well with the baggage issue you were talking about, people grabbing their hand luggage. So do you think that the consumer campaign you've launched is going to be sufficient to you know, prevent this sort of lack of standardisation around the world, or do you see that continuing?
I think we haven't seen a significant proliferation from what we had seen originally with some of the incidents primarily in the Asia Pacific region. And that one's a pretty sensational one, which created the diversion of the flames and the video and all that stuff, which we saw online. I think you know, each airline is going to look at this differently. They're going to use their safety management system to determine their risk assessment, their risk profile, and how they like to handle it. So there will always be a little bit of variation. The variation will be a little bit more restrictive than perhaps some others that feel that they can manage it better on board. We're seeing airlines getting better in terms of fire prevention, fire suspension, when these events do take place. I think awareness from consumers is going to help. And I do think that with this greatest awareness and continued education campaign, that we should nip this kind of in the bud to where we are today.
Hi, building on that gentleman's question around Airbus earlier, focusing specifically on space weather, what sort of attention is IATA giving to space weather from a risk point of view?
Well, I mean, airlines are getting space weather data now. I mean, it's how much of an impact does it have on operational day-to-day operations in terms of flight dispatch? Perhaps minimal. That may evolve as we understand better the information that we're receiving. But it is something that we are involved in. We do have I actually got a briefing yesterday from our weather folks that are looking at a bunch of different areas around weather, but space-based weather was not prevalent to any large degree in what they're looking at. So I think that it's there. We are paying attention to it. The Airbus situation maybe gave some additional light to the fact that we're getting this data, and people perhaps not necessarily so aware of it. But it's not a huge concern. It's not something not on anybody's risk radar. And it, just to expand a little bit, perhaps, because it normally, you know, when you think space weather, you think gamma rays, and you think, you know, solar flares, and you think radiation. Radiation is monitored globally on a regular basis, and so if there were going to be a concern around radiation on aircraft, it wouldn't have been when we waited for space-based weather to provide us with that information.
Graham, Newton Airlines. With the spectrum, Nick, is this really confined to North America, and what are other regions, you know, got prepared to handle this?
It has been mostly in a US issue. Primarily because of the sort of first onslaught of 5G and the lack of an agreement between the FCC and the FAA around its deployment. That ended up being an 11th-hour decision, and right now we're okay until 2028. Who knows what happens after that? Canada is a concern at the moment because their agreement they have with respect to, I mentioned where the towers are, that they are pointing, what frequency they're emitting. That agreement is up in 2026. We don't know what the plan is at the moment. We suspect they will extend, but we never, put a guess on that. We want to see concrete response if that's the case. Australia is also up in 2026. They had issues before, prior to the rollout. Most other locations has been Africa. There's been some issues and reports, but like I said, we're pulling together a better understanding of the reporting. It's not the greatest data point we have, so we need more data around this interference or when it happens for us to be able to speak to it a little bit more intelligently in terms of where we're getting it globally, what locations are more prevalent. But like I said, the US was definitely the largest area.
Sorry, Nick, just two more questions on spectrum. What is it that can be done to mitigate the issues with spectrum? Question one. And question two, why is it taking so long for the retrofits to take place? Why the industry's been about it for a while? What's the challenge?
Okay, I'll do the second one first. I'd love to throw Honeywell under the bus, but I can't. So that's the answer to number two. Number one, primarily at the moment is education and training for pilots. Increased communication from air navigation service providers and the pilots themselves to be able to be prepared for any spectrum issues that they may encounter. I think the biggest issues around telco is making sure that they have their towers pointing in a direction away from the airport vicinity, the aerodrome in particular, and also to lower the frequency. So it's not up against that frequency band that we're operating in, primarily for radio altimeters, which is 4.4, not to bore you to death, but it's 4.4 to 4.6, I believe, and then obviously 5G is at 5. So there's a risk that there's a spillover, or they call it bleed. So that's primarily the best way to deal with it.
Okay, the mic. No, it's okay. So run to the back. Come here. We'll give you a mic. You have a mic? Yeah.
If you can, in the recent weeks, we are increasing Guinea's interference in Venezuela, affecting some areas and some areas, especially in Latin America. So, can you, what has data detected and how to do this affect the flight risk, and what are recommendations for the airlines, especially and operation in Venezuela, the Venezuelan carrier?
I think it's not a surprise. I think it's new in a way to South America in terms of interference. If you're asking a Middle Eastern carrier or someone who operates in a lot of Eastern Europe, it would be very well adept to dealing with these issues when they happen. It was new, like I said, to the Latin American carriers in particular, and around Venezuela. Most have stopped operating. There was a few airlines that were continuing to operate. They were continuing to get jamming and spoofing during their operations. We've escalated to IATA in hopes that they can intervene and try to assist in mitigating the amount of spoofing and jamming that we're seeing. But it's very difficult when 1/3 of the fleet sitting on the doorstep. This happens during conflict zones and military operations, and we have to mitigate as best we can. Airline have operations to deal with them, procedures on board their aircraft or resets or, so there's procedures in place. We just like to be able to see the less of it.
And you consider if this impact in the more the impact extend the region, considering the geopolitical situation and especially the Venezuela regime in the rest of the Latin America?
I can tell you what I think personally, but not what it's not something that we can comment on at IATA.
Thanks.
Yeah. Is it working? No, Hudson.
Thank you, Leonard Beber from the Italian newspaper Corriere. Question related to the drones in the European airports or unidentified flying objects, because we are not sure about 100% the stores are related to drones. But are you aware of any particular airline that is changing their plan when they land or when they take off from the European airports because of those drone sites nearby? And if not, what can do the airlines to try to minimize that impact, considering that if they close the airport, it's closed for everyone? Thank you.
Well, I mean, this happens, unfortunately. It seems to be it seems to be sporadic. You know, we had a number of issues in the UK a few years ago, and then it kind of died off. And you know, Brussels had their share of challenges recently. I mean, airlines become aware of these risks, and you know, airports and air navigation service providers will close the airspace, and airplanes won't operate till it's clear. And that's the safest form of operating, and that's how no airline is going to try to operate if there's a risk of contact with something that's not supposed to be there. Be treated like any other aircraft. So, not aware of anybody changing any procedures, and there hasn't been any discussions, to my knowledge, of anyone wanting to change any procedures at this point. Just hoping that at some point we don't have this type of disruption in and around the airport. But you know, you can't control everything that operates, especially these things. Most 99% follow rules, and you will have from time to time those that don't. We have systems that will pick up that activity, and unfortunately it will impact the operation because the airspace will be closed until they address it.
Tomasz Niedzierski, Orient Aviation. Is there any data about these thermal or runaway incidents? I mean, how many serious incidents happen? And understand that's on a race, but what's the dynamic, how serious it is? And also, maybe, is there any region that this problem is particularly serious?
Around? Did you get that? Could you repeat the question?
This lithium battery fires. I mean, how many serious incidents happen so far? Is it like? I understand what's happening more, but what's the dynamic? You know.
I mean, there's quite a few lithium batteries that take place. An exact number we can get you. They're handled like they should be, and they don't make the news. High-profile events, we probably had a couple this year. One in particular in Scoot that sticks out. But so it's not as many as you would think. But if it does happen, and you know, I think not so much in the cabin. The cabin's a concern, obviously, but it's more if it happens in the cargo hold and thermal runaway and the risks associated with that. Is why we're so vigilant on the issue, because it's not something to be taken lightly. But the fact that we're on it is a reason to avoid there being a problem in the first place. But we will get you some statistics on the amounts that we're seeing. And that's like KK just said in my ear. That, like I said in the presentation, the more people that carry this stuff, the greater the risk.
So just, is there any region that it's probably it's more serious, or is it like everywhere the same?
Nah, it's everywhere, yeah.
Robert?
Yeah, Robert Silk, Travel Weekly. You mentioned, Nick, that North America has the biggest problem with hand baggage. Catherine, you mentioned that you're gonna do a study. Maybe you can, are you all doing an fielding actual research study on this question of what the psych traits are behind it? And any theories on why we're the worst?
Well, I mean, it's just because there's been a few incidents where it's been illustrated through social media with people running across the tarmac with their bags and stuff. So that I'm kind of being flippant by picking on North America because it's front and center, but it is an issue globally. It's not that we're not looking at targeting any specific area. Studies will be done, yes. KK mentioned the sort of psychological aspect of why we all feel the need, because we're told the announcements are there in case of emergency leave, everything. And anyone that's been through shouted commands, the flight attendants, I unfortunately have been, and the flight attendants are going to be screaming to the top of their lungs to exit the airplane and leave everything behind. So it will be interesting to see what we come up with when we go through that from a psychological standpoint. The rest will be simple, just a reminder that leave your stuff on board. Maybe it's just something could be as simple as that. But yeah, it's not. I don't know what in terms of timing we're thinking. By mid-year, more than likely at the AGM or in advance of it.
Are enough airlines including in their safety presentations that leave your handbags behind? I feel like maybe I'm not, but I've seen a little more of it on U.S. airlines, but it wasn't always a standard there.
That's a good question. I think it's part of normal briefing. We've never done a survey on what airlines are saying on board their aircraft. It's a good question. We can look into it. But again, every airline does approach this a little bit differently, and just like turbulence. In the U.S., the approach to turbulence, chances of you flying domestically and a flight attendant sitting for the entire flight is a lot higher in the U.S. than it is elsewhere because of some pretty high profile turbulence incidents. Whereas you may not see that in some other locations around the world in terms of the seatbelt sign being on for the entire flight. So there will be variation. None of them were working. It was on purpose, actually. I unplugged it when I came in.
Kate Duffy from Bloomberg News. With all the airlines around the world agreeing deals for Wi-Fi connection, including with Starlink or also Viasat, are you seeing any risks at all with this?
No, actually, it could be a benefit from an operational standpoint, but another communication link. I'll use an example. Type E messaging is an old antiquated way of communication, especially from dispatch and air traffic control. This provides an opportunity to be able to communicate in different, less expensive way, actually. So no, we welcome players. Not only that, it lets us stream better on board aircraft when we're flying for long distances, so there's an advantage to that too from a customer standpoint. So no, there's no risk involved in using satellite service providers for internet.
Thank you, Nick. I would now like to invite our Global Head of Cargo, Brendan Sullivan, to come to the stage, along with Julia Searman, our Head of Industry Analysis. We're going to have a session on air cargo trends and opportunities.